All right, back here, day 2, Forrester B2B Summit on the marketplace floor. Thanks again to Forrester for making this possible. I think this is our 12th recording, Jim, so far here the last couple of days. Just got an amazing amount of content. So we've got some analysts, got some ROI award winners, lots of CMOs, including you, Jim Williams, CMO at Uptempo. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Excited to see you here. As always, you guys have an activation across the street, doing a bunch of panels and sessions on your own. Want to talk about today this relationship between the go-to-market teams and finance, because that is not always a, let's say, productive, positive conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe start with, why is there so much friction between those teams, and why does that persist?
Yeah, it's really good question, and it's a topic that I'm pretty passionate about. Why am I passionate about that? First, I'm with Uptempo, and we provide marketing planning and spend management software, budget management software.
Yep.
It's funny, one of the sessions that we had here focused squarely on this disconnect between marketing and finance. Mm-hmm. And we were talking earlier about like, hey, it used to be about a disconnect between marketing and sales. We spent the last 15 years trying to patch that up with agreements, frameworks, and SLAs and everything else. But that investment has not been made in the relationship between marketing and finance. And so what you end up with is marketers and certainly sales and other folks that really don't understand the basics of financial management,
right?
Much less the specifics of what your FP&A team, your controller actually has to deal with. And a lot of wasted time, poor forecast accuracy, wasted spend, lack of trust, disconnects, etc. You know, the finance team views marketing, I'll be specific to marketing, you're talking about go-to-market teams, but kind of views marketing as like, you know, the children that can't get their shit together once a month to close the books. So they come with a stack of spreadsheets that have errors in them or the wrong versions or whatever the case may be, and don't even have basic visibility into the state of their spend.
And when we don't solve for that, what happens is you've got marketers that don't have trust from finance. You've got marketers that to finance look like you're just spending money willy-nilly and not having fiscal responsibility for the business. So when you come back and want more money, of course the answer is no. Like, even if you come back and say, oh, I need to focus on demand gen, or oh, we need to go after this new market, like, that sounds great, but that is a nebulous objective. And I'm sitting here saying, we only have X amount of money. Yeah. What is it really going to take to do that? And so I feel like the planning process between marketing and finance is completely disconnected without better tools, processes, systems to make that happen.
Yeah, totally. That is definitely a challenge. And it causes all types of downstream implications, right? So marketers in B2B, because we're here talking about B2B, like are myopically focused on creating pipeline that converts into sales, obviously. There is a lot of talk of ROI. Like if you talk to a marketer, they'll be like, oh my God, we got great ROI on that campaign. But they actually don't calculate return on investment. And if they did, they don't actually calculate it against their actual spend, because a lot of times they don't know their actual spend. So there's the whole ROI and return you're getting, but then that cascades in a whole bunch of things. You know, like finance leaders want people to think about their customer acquisition costs, and marketers are far from understanding the implications there. Or salespeople just want to know first, what are you doing to support me? Like, what campaigns are you running to support me, my territory, my products, etc. Right. And marketers, first of all, have a hard time answering that because they don't have a calendar. But even deeper, like they should be able to say, actually, we're investing this amount of money to drive growth in your particular area. And this is how we've allocated to do that.
That planning gap seems like something that should be solvable. And I know Uptempo obviously have solutions around that, but it gets even harder when you get out of sort of the hard ROI, quote unquote, areas. Like if I'm focusing on building pipeline, even if I'm not just counting on like one channel versus another, even if I say it's going to take a body of work, right? I need to invest in these field activations, this conference, these lists, these digital plays on this market. Okay, that's still, you can add those numbers together and say like, does that give us enough pipeline? Was it worth it? Did it pan out? Should we do it again? Now you got marketers starting to talk this year about reinvesting in brand and content and sort of the longer term plays, right? So now we're saying I've got money allocated in 2024 that I expect to give back to the business over the next 2 to 3+ years, not just in the next selling period. Like, how does that change the dynamic of planning and accountability between marketing and finance? It
has a huge impact on us. So like, it's funny, what brand is not only suddenly the new demand, right? I love that. But again, put yourself on the seat of a CFO. They don't get into nuances of brand versus demand versus reputation versus engagement, much less have a way to manage their expectations on the ROI for each of those classes of marketing programs. And so marketing needs to do that. And it's really difficult to do that if they don't understand the basics of spend management. Like, think about it. We have a customer we just did a webinar with, a company named Reckitt, which, by the way, I didn't know who Reckitt was, but they're Lysol. They manage Lysol brands.
Wow. Okay.
Right? And Durex brands and other things like that. They literally sell 30 million products a day. Pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And this guy is basically running a $700 million budget for North America and trying to get to like 0.005% forecast accuracy against it.
Wow.
You know, because 1% accuracy is $7 million of waste.
Yeah.
In that budget.
Yeah.
That's what finance is expecting.
Yeah.
And take those dollars and redirect them to the highest performing channels. And the way you figure that out, obviously, is connection between financial allocation, marketing budgets, marketing planning, marketing results to get to ROI.
Got Jim Williams with us today. He's the CMO at Uptempo and talking about really planning and accountability and following through on what you said you're going to do. I mean, simple concepts that sort of are, I mean, again, without the right systems, without the right discipline, and without the right tools, it becomes incredibly difficult. I imagine you've seen some before and after interesting stories of companies that have good intention but fail in the execution of that. Can you talk about the before and after, what that means in terms of the finance marketing relationship and what it unlocks in terms of marketing being able to really accelerate its impact on the business?
Yeah, sure. It's funny, we were doing these panel discussions and we have a customer that we've been working with that you may be familiar with, Indeed.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. It's funny, I was talking with their chief of staff to the CMO and she talked about the trigger event, like the watershed moment when the CMO was asked pretty straightforward question about like, is the plan working?
Yeah.
Those are the hardest questions to answer, like so high, so nebulous. It's like, where do I start looking for data to answer if the plan is working? And when she went looking for the data, she realized that the plan is locked up in dozens of spreadsheets, many versions of PowerPoint, Slack messages, etc. There is no system of record today in the modern business for, you might say, marketing. If you think about marketing as a business, there's not a system of record for that, much less a system of record for where your official plans are. And if you don't have a system of record, then how can this large team be on the same page, be collaborating, etc.? And what do you do when you need to change the plan? Which plan are you changing? Which is nonstop, right? We're living in the world, like the era of nonstop pivots. So they went through a whole process to redefine their planning, not just through Uptempo. They worked with all types of experts around this. And they did something like reduce the amount of documentation involved in planning by, I think they said 60%.
Wow.
You know, like all of these spreadsheets and PowerPoints that different groups and field marketing teams were using, et cetera. They did that. They have a very rigid structure, a taxonomy and a hierarchy that describes what their intent is. Like, where do they intend to spend the money? Well, that's a plan, and a plan is bounded by timelines and targets and personas and everything else. They created a rigid structure around that, and their planning process, they shrunk from 7 months to 4 months. So think about that too. Like, you're a large enterprise. You literally plan for 7 months, then launch the plan, and at the end of the first quarter, you start planning for the next year. Right. So they're trying to compress that as much as possible so they can be agile.
So you cut almost 50% of the time, and you cut the majority of the paperwork to get there.
Silo sprawl.
What's exciting about that to me is, like, we have a lot of clients. We do a lot of work in what we call marketing orchestration, right? So just like the act of getting marketing work done. And as the complexity and the agility required to do go-to-market motions grows, it just means more meetings, more work, more getting things done. And if you don't have a system, if you don't have a workflow, a taxonomy, it gets kind of boring quickly. But if you don't have that stuff nailed down, this is what happens. You're going to have paperwork up the wazoo. You're going to have everyone with different planning processes. You're going to speak a different language than what the rest of the business wants to hear. And then, I mean, we see this in big companies all the time where they're constantly in planning mode. And guess what happens then? They're not doing work. They're not getting the stuff done. So to me, like, this feels like a huge missing part for organizations as they grow, that to unlock the agility, the speed to market, the professionalism, and the accountability of the marketing work that they're doing. And if all you want to do is decrease the time and the paperwork, and if you decrease the paperwork, that means fewer meetings, fewer Slack messages, fewer email threads. I'm hoping I'm speaking a lot of people's language now.
Yeah,
Just
totally.
make this good. And the icing on the cake is now, like, finance trusts you. Finance understands what you're trying to do, and they're not looking for perfection. They're not looking for everything to work, but they just want everybody to understand what isn't working so you can make adjustments and create more predictable outcomes next.
Right. And share a common language.
Yeah.
Again, like you focus on pipeline, go to market and everything. Think about that. 15 years ago, there was this revolution in just establishing an accepted language to describe the things you're doing, right? Is this an MQL, an SAL, or SQO, and now it's a 6QA or whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
There's a language that forges alignment between these groups, and that hasn't really existed between marketing and finance. Just getting to that is really important because that boring stuff, taxonomy and hierarchy and nomenclature or whatever, is actually really, really important to become more agile and more effective.
So we're talking about all this as if it's kind of a foregone conclusion, right? I mean, like, hey, less paperwork, less time, better accountability, finance loves you. I'm assuming that means like 100% of your pipeline converts, right, at up tempo. So assuming that isn't the case, what are the obstacles that you find for companies that, like, if they hear all this and say, that's amazing, is it status quo? Is it just institutional inertia? And I'm asking this because I want companies that are listening to this to self-identify with things that they might recognize in their own organizations might be hidden barriers to making this kind of leap in accountability and performance.
Yeah. No, 100% of our pipeline does not convert.
Breaking news.
Yeah, breaking news.
Yeah.
I'm not converting all my pipeline. Sure, we run into all those obstacles. So number one is at a very, very large enterprise.
Yeah.
Right? IKEA as a customer. Right? You're talking about 500 stores and 60,000 employees and X number of marketers, whatever. It is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And just trying to wrangle the process stuff so you can get on to planning better,
Yeah.
it requires some digital transformation that affects a whole bunch of people. We just talked about, well, it certainly affects marketing.
Yeah.
It affects finance.
Yeah.
It affects your go-to-market teams, your production, how you work with agencies, how you work with resell. Like, there's a lot involved, so it can get pretty complex. That creates some friction for sure.
Yeah.
Another issue is that you're a CMO. Here's all the list of things that frankly are a pain in the ass, and always planning is up there on the list. But then you start to think, all right, where am I going to invest my dollars? What am I going to fix right now? And you're pressured by sales and margin and pipeline. And it's always like, let's throw the dollar more into the execution side of the business.
Yeah.
And we'll get by with this headless series of programs and campaigns that are happening. That's definitely a problem too.
Why is this coming out of the marketing budget? Is finance paying for this in some cases?
Almost never does finance pay for it, but in large companies, finance sends an ambassador of sorts and attaches them to marketing. That's called literally marketing finance. You pluck someone on FPA and then they go sit with marketing to try and make sure that they're being a very good steward of the company's resources. And so that role, marketing finance, is almost always involved in our deals. Does finance pay for it? No. It comes out of marketing because the real driver is when the CMO gets asked a question like, how's the plan going? Is the plan working? Should we consider changing the plan? Those types of questions. Or even when a new CMO comes in and has so much more specific questions like, what are we spending on what initiatives? And suddenly everyone goes silent.
Yeah, here at Forrester, there's been a lot of talk about these broader like buying groups, right? The internally and externally, the ecosystems. And so when we think about buying committees, I think 9 times out of 10, we think about the people internally that are making those decisions. So you think about the people in marketing, specifically, they're going to buy this because if they're paying for it. Well, what about that controller that's pulling their hair out, right? That may not have the budget, but it certainly has the pain and might be able to still go rattle some change within marketing. What about the governance committee on the board, right? That is frustrated with this, that might actually from the top down have at least say like, go look at this stuff because it's important to us.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Those are factors. They're involved. They're part of the new buying network, if you call it that. It was buyer groups. Now it's buying network. Yeah, they're definitely a factor. But the impetus to make change has to come from the top because it does require change management. There is some digital transformation. There's some integration that needs to be done. So IT gets involved, right? At a minimum, you have to integrate with your financial infrastructure and you have to integrate with your performance infrastructure. And often we integrate with work management infrastructure, right? So it often comes from the top. typically a champion for us is someone that's very strategic in marketing operations, or also often it's the role that I mentioned earlier, like a chief of staff to the CMO is very influential in bringing in infrastructure so people can plan better and spend smarter.
Well, I know you guys have a busy schedule across the street, so I want to get back to that. Jim Williams, CMO at UpTempo, thanks so much for joining us.
I appreciate it, Matt. Thank you.